Why did we name the publication the Ojo-Yoshida Report? It's because the two of us believe that our names should be on it. Call us on what we write. It's that important. The Yoshida name, the Ojo name, people know us and they want to read what we're saying. They want to read our opinion, our spin on things. And if we can't stand by it, then we're not going to publish it.
Hello and welcome to the Semi-Conscious podcast from TKO Marketing Consultants, the specialist agency for the electronics industry. I'm Tim Weeks, a consultant at TKO, and in this edition of Semi-Conscious, I'm talking to Bolaji Ojo and Junko Yoshida of the Ojo-Yoshida Report. I asked them about how they see the current state of the electronics industry media and about its history from when they started in the 1990s, and why they set up the Ojo-Yoshida Report as a subscription-only service. I started the interview by asking them about how they got their break into electronics industry journalism. Junko Yoshida answered first.
I actually worked in a Japanese consumer electronics company for a long time. I was a public relations person. So I have a very interesting background. I know both PR side and media side. And I cut my teeth as the person who takes care of foreign correspondents coming to Tokyo. And I'm talking about late 80s. And that was a hot area. Japan in 80s was China of today. All the journalists who are up and coming and upward mobile, these guys actually were assigned Tokyo. Tokyo was a destination assignment for people to, from New York Times, Business Week, LA Times, everybody to get moved up. So my job was actually talking to these guys and not just pitching the company product, but helping them to see the industry landscape. I happen to be in the consumer electronics industry, as I said. I was working for JVC, Victor Company of Japan. So they were actually developer of VHS, but the world at that time knew developer of VHS was its parent company, Panasonic. So we had to go head to head with the JVC had to go head to head with Sony. And that was a very difficult job because my job wasn't the propaganda. My job was to tell the exactly where the market is. So that was a good kind of a training for me. And when I was still working for JVC, I was asked if I'm interested in working for EE Times as Tokyo correspondent. And that's how I got the job. And I tell you that I knew nothing about semiconductors when I joined, so I didn't really break into it. I was a really idiot savant, but that's how I got started as a Tokyo correspondent for E Times.
How did things develop from there? Because I think you didn't stay in.
You
Japan
want to really hear the story?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, actually, what happened was I had a job offer by Wall Street Journal, and they wanted me to write for the journal in Tokyo. And I thought about it. And I talked to my boss in New York, and and my boss actually in New York told me at that time, Junko, I can't tell any of my reporters not to take the journal's job if you get a job offer. That would be really unfair.
It doesn't get more prestigious, does it, than the Wall Street Journal?
Yeah. And but then what happened was that during the interview, the journal guy asked me that, so give me your 3 top story ideas. Because I was supposedly getting being interviewed for this job. So give me your top 3 tech story ideas originates in Tokyo. And I said, why do I have to share my story ideas with you when I'm not even working for you, right? Because it's the journal may not think EE Times a competitor, but at EE Times in those days, all the reporters are actually told we are competing with the journal and the Times. That was a mindset. We never had the trade rug mindset. We knew our stuff, and we are competing head to head with the mainstream newspapers. That's how we were trained. So and so in the end, I realized that working for the journal as a Tokyo hire, that Japan hire, that means I'm a second class citizen.
Yeah.
Even if I move to the U.S., I'll never be. I'll be the helping hand for the white
Yes.
guy coming from
Like
the New York
yeah,
and
like
to
the
write
yeah,
stories.
like
And
the
I
fix
didn't want
yeah, the
that.
fixer.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So
Excellent.
the my boss at that time in New York told me that Junko, how about we move you to Silicon Valley?
Mm.
And that's how I decided not to take the journal job, but came to Silicon Valley.
Okay, all right. And Bola, what about you? Tell us how you found your way into the electronics industry.
Well, next year will be happily my 48th year in journalism. I'm kind of happy about that and proud of it also. But in a sense, and similar to what Junko said, I kind of bounced around a little bit, starting out working on TV in Nigeria. So I grew up in Nigeria, went to college in Nigeria and studied mass communication. So um, my desire right from the beginning was to be a foreign correspondent. But in order to do that, I had to first establish myself with a company or some outlet that would encourage that. So I worked on TV in Nigeria, I worked on radio, joined the news magazine after a while. And then I left the country, ended up working in Europe, in journalism also, and then in Asia. I managed to get to the US and worked at Bloomberg News.
Hmm.
And there, for me, that was where the passion came from. I discovered that I liked numbers. I discovered that I liked reading income statement, balance sheet, cash flow statement. I enjoyed it. And that was
Mm-hmm.
fostered also, by um, the 1 year that I spent at Columbia Business School under the Knight Budget Fellowship. So that gave me a better and deeper understanding of finance and
Yes.
accounting, and I enjoyed using that at Bloomberg. So before leaving Columbia University, I got a call from, I have to mention him by name because I've been thinking of doing a series of podcasts on supply chain. And the guy who really gave me an understanding of why we should look at supply chain in every business area, his name is Matt Shearing. He was my editor in chief at Electronics Buyers News. He wanted me to write about the businesses, the
Yes.
companies that were involved in the technology area. And I think, I mean, this is important because the first thing was that I covered the entire spectrum. So everything that I just talked about, which meant that I got to know each one of these companies, it was
Yes.
hard work because you have to understand each company when you were writing about them. But because I had to cover the entire breadth of it, it gave me a good understanding of how everything was connected. Like
Yeah.
Junko, I didn't have a semiconductor background,
Hmm.
but the first week, Matt threw a book to me, I've forgotten, Semiconductor Insider or something like that. It was a whole book. So I spent the next 2 months basically boning up on semiconductors, learning about them and all that. So, but in addition to that, so people focus on semiconductors, but there are interconnects, there are passives, there are electromechanical components,
Of course.
all
Of
kinds of
course.
components. Okay, there are backplanes and all of those things. The book explained it all and explained why they were all connected. So since then, my focus has remained on the business side, looking at these companies, their financial health, whether the product they were making was going to find a market. You can have the greatest product in the world, but if you can't sell it, or if you can't make it at the right price,
Of
make
course.
it at the right location where you can get it to the right customers who's interested in buying it, you've got a dud. So that's
Absolutely.
that's fascinating for me.
Yes.
So that was
Yeah.
how I got into the electronic trade press.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, that's really interesting because both of you are describing a journey that is really, really driven by pure I would say, pure reporters, pure journalistic principles of wanting to understand the field that you're working in, discover what's changing, and report that to your audience. That's real pure journalism. Do you, I mean, looking back from today, we're 2023, but sort of you're describing a journey through sort of the 1990s and the 2000s. Do you look back on that as a golden era of that kind of pure journalism?
No, I don't really think so. I mean, it was there are more outlets, media outlets available, so there's more opportunity. But that doesn't really say whether that was a golden era. It's over. I don't really think so. It's really up to us, each individual reporter, to figure out what the news is, which seems like, for example, I'll give you one example, which I kind of stumbled into. I was briefed by Infineon about the security chip, that they were actually making a microcontroller that works in the e-passport. This was the beginning of electronic passport. How do you put the chip inside the passport? And
Yeah.
that was actually being agreed internationally. ICAO
Mm.
had this specification done, and all the chip companies, or companies like certainly NXP, Infineon,
Mm.
ST, they're all working
Mm.
for this.
Yes.
And I happened to heard the story about that. There's that kind of a testing, not shootout, but they wanted, the government wants the especially Department of Homeland Security. This is early 2000, right after this 9/11. So Department of Homeland Security wanted to do actual testing on the field. And as part of the testing, they found out the chips can chip can enable those passport chips can enable the passport controllers to know where this person came from. What kind of information is in the passport can be
Mm.
actually transmitted
Mm.
wirelessly.
Mm.
And it's actually great, great feature. But at the same time, what if somebody else is listening in? If you're a U.S. citizen, you have a target on your back, and somebody has this, suitcase size equipment to
Mm.
figure out,
Yeah.
which person is from where, that sort of thing. So, make a long story short, I learned that the U.S. government at that time was originally thinking about disabling the ability to collect the information, which seems kind of odd, but they needed to process passports as many as possible. So they didn't want to have the security feature on it. And that became a big deal. And, something like that. The passport control chip itself is wonderful. It's interesting how it is applied,
Yeah.
how the government wants it to be applied, and how the people who have, ACLU, for example, got involved, and
Mm.
how ACLU think about the privacy issues. All these things are kind of put together. But thanks to the chip, without chip, none of these things happen. But to me, chip was the first step, and what happens then next was really interesting story
Mm.
that actually speaks to not only us chip heads, but also to the general public. And
Yeah.
I think that story, how do you elevate the story to the issues that matter to the society, is
Mm.
something Bola and I had talked about a great deal. And that,
Mm.
if I may say, that's the genesis of the Ojo-Yoshida Report. Our focus is there. Chips is great, and we write about chips, and we write about technologies that enable chips. But at the same time, what chips does, what impact chips have on society, is a great deal of interest to us, and people should know.
Yeah. Yeah.
I will back that up, Tim, by saying it's the big picture. It's the bigger picture that you have to enable people to know and understand. and I appreciate. Of course, the companies that we write about are in business, right? So they are in it to make money. But nobody sometimes asks about the impact of what they do on society at large. We ask those questions. It's extremely important. And when you ask those questions, does not really matter whether you were asking it in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, the early 2000s now, or in the future. Somebody still has to ask those questions and help society as at large understand the impact of innovations and technology on society at large. So
Yeah.
the impact can be on the folks that are making a huge amount of money. So look, I have to give kudos to Junko here because there are certain areas that she's covered over the years that we had a lot of laggards now running up and catching up. So the automotive semiconductor market, for instance, what's happening now. Before there was AVs and EVs, she started covering that, and even up until now, what she still writes about has to do with what does this really mean? Are companies being responsible? So we focus on the technology. No doubts about that because it's the fundament, is the foundation for what we write about. So, but then you also ask the question of the technology that's being developed. How will it be used? Where will it be used? Who gets to control its usage? Who gets to apply it? Who gets to decide, where, when, how? And also, what is the immediate impact in society? So I mentioned AVs, and we've been following some stories about Tesla and
And sorry
Cruise
there,
and
Bola, by AVs you mean autonomous vehicles, yeah?
autonomous vehicles.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Autonomous vehicles. So so they are there in the marketplace. They are already robocars. Okay, so they are there, but they it's great technology that's also causing a lot of havoc. Now, which generation that coverage is happening does not matter. So the guiding principle that we believe is on the responsibility that the reporter, whoever that person may be, whether you're trained or not, what are your responsibilities to the entire ecosystem that you cover? My background in at Bloomberg News taught me or reinforced something that I already had. When you reported at Bloomberg News in those days and up until now, there are traders who are moving around billions of dollars that are just watching, and it's fractional information that they need. So if the Bloomberg terminal got the information first, it beats Thomson Reuters, right? Okay. So as a reporter, you want to get your information out as quickly as you can, but that does not enable you, or it does not mean that you then get to put out the wrong information because a lot of money is at stake.
Yeah.
That's number
So
one.
as a reporter, you feel very powerfully the responsibility on you to get it right and to get the right information.
you know,
Yeah.
you know,
Mm.
Tim, the best way for me to sum that up without kind of going on and on is to say this. Why did we name the publication the Ojo-Yoshida Report? It's because the two of us believe that our names should be on it. Call us on what we write. It's that important.
Yes.
The Yoshida name, the Ojo name, people know us and they want to read what we're saying. They want to read our opinion, our
Yeah.
spin on
Yeah.
things. And if we can't stand by it, then we're not going to publish it.
Yeah.
That
And
I would say is the motto that we operate on.
so when you launched the Ojo-Yoshida report, um, you must have identified that there was a gap in the market, that somehow that market wasn't currently being fully served. Why do you think that was? Is that because Junko, you were talking earlier about the competition with Wall Street Journal, for instance. Is it that because those kind of very high-level, prestigious, mainstream titles actually don't quite get the semiconductor industry?
I think it's both sides actually. The general press really don't have much time to dig deeper into the semiconductors weeds, right?
Yes,
That's number
and the
one.
way
It's
that
no fault
Bola
of
was
their own.
explaining,
Yeah,
doing all of that work
yeah,
to
to
understand
the
the
general
industry. That's
public,
hard,
right? So
long, hard
that's
work.
one.
Yeah.
Yeah. but also reporters on the trade publications. They are the experts. They know the technology. Many of them are actually engineering background.
Yes.
And I always felt the inferiority complex. I'm not an engineer. Writing about engineering matters through the engineers at EE Times, that was
Mm,
always very difficult for me.
mm,
I admit it. But at the
mm,
same time, the I think what's going on, you mentioned 80s, 90s, how things have changed. I think what happened was when number of publication, number of media outlets started to diminish, and the advertising dollars started to go down, number of people working. I think what happens is more pressure on reporters working in the tech industry to compete for eyeballs, number of page views. And that did not go over very well with people who wanted to write a longer version of the stories, or to not just today's news, but what was behind today's news, write it in 2 days later. Does not matter to the page views. Sometimes it matters and other times it doesn't.
mm,
So I think the I felt like there's actually missing middle, that people who can tell a big story, big picture story, people who can tell really detailed technology story, and we there's a space that we could exist, I thought.
The landscape changed, team. The landscape changed dramatically, just like Junko was explaining it. A lot of publications that we competed against on the trade press side and in mainstream media, a lot of them went out of business.
yeah.
And then also some of the wonderful folks who used to work at these publications, they went over, if you can use the word, some of them went over to the dark side. Many retired, and
Mm,
some were co-opted and started working at these companies that we cover. So you have Nvidia that basically has a lot of folks writing, and they're doing great work there. Is another example. Every single one of these publications, these companies, semiconductor companies and OEMs, they developed large media units, um, all very good. They rated publications like the Wall Street Journal, the Financial Times, all of the trade publications. So, what happened then is that, and then you also have these dynamics where we don't have a lot of younger reporters that are gravitating towards this industry. And that is still a problem. And I see that as an ongoing problem that the industry somehow has to tackle. It's not going to be solved by every semiconductor company out there recruiting folks to write for them, because when people see it, the first thing they think is, look, they don't, you have the issue of how can I trust what this company is putting out there? So that's an issue. Now, so when I said the landscape changed, one of the things that we thought about was you still have to do those hard work of getting the news and of understanding, of helping your readers to understand what it actually means.
mm,
You also have to do the hard work of taking companies to task about what they do. We do that a lot.
yeah.
Maybe so it costs us advertising dollars or subscription or whatever, but we still call up companies and ask them why they're doing such and such, if they've thought it all through. We ran a series recently on sustainability, semiconductor manufacturing and sustainability.
Yeah.
You don't get a lot of eyeballs for those. You just don't, which means you don't get sponsorship for those sections of our
Yeah.
publication.
Mm,
But we believe very strongly that these are topics of interest.
mm,
You have to
mm,
know that whatever you write, somebody's going to read it,
mm,
and it's
mm,
going to impact them, and it might
mm,
change the trajectory of their
mm,
of their business, their career, and
mm,
stuff like that.
mm, mm,
So it's not that there are no avenues for practicing that kind of journalism anymore. They are just diminished. They're
mm,
severely diminished. So how you have to look at the landscape and maybe narrow them down to certain publications. You may have to do a lot of freelancing In fact, you will have to do a lot of freelancing because the advertising budget is just not there enough to support the number of publications that we used to have in this industry. They're spending the money more on direct marketing. So you have OEMs and semiconductor companies trying to develop their own database that they reach directly. So that reduces what you are able to do. But if you're really truly interested in the type of journalism that is responsible journalism, that's the way I would describe it, you have to dig deeper. You have to look at smaller outlets that have the same kind of editorial commitment. I don't have a list, but if you're going to do it, start with the Ojo-Yoshida Report.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's talk about the Ojo-Yoshida Report, because you do have that commitment to high quality journalism and to the responsibility to your audience and to society. But as you're saying, advertising dollars just are not there in the way they were in the 1990s and 2000s. How do you make it work?
It's a business question, so I'm gonna give it a start first, and then I let Junko pitch in. So we are a subscription-based publication. So you want to read us, you have to subscribe because it does take us a lot of time to get things and get them right. So we do believe that, much as we have a responsibility to the industry and to our society, anybody who wants to read us also has a responsibility to help fund these outlets. That's part of the problem. That was how we got to where we are now, where everything became open, especially with the internet. Everything just became open. Everything came out for free. Well, the Wall Street Journal is no longer that free. Neither is the Financial Times, the Economist, the Washington Post. We subscribe to some of these publications. The New York Times is not free. Even the Boston Globe. The publications that are going to survive will have to depend more on the readers. So it's a difference in how these publications are funded. So one, we are subscription based. So you want to read us, you have to subscribe. Now, we don't force you to immediately subscribe. So you have 2 months free to first look at it, kick it around, and decide whether or not you want to subscribe. So that's number one. Number two is that, look, we also like to have corporate sponsors, companies that believe that there is a role for the press. And so those corporate sponsors, they pay a certain amount of money every year, to be corporate sponsors of the publication. One other thing that we also have done, so, Tim, I'll put it this way. The editorial standard does not change. It doesn't matter whether you're a sponsor or not. We don't reduce or lower our editorial standard for you. But there are avenues for companies to also talk about what they're doing. So we're doing more podcasts, more video casts now. Maybe Junko may have a different take.
No, I totally agree. I mean, it's not an easy business, to be honest with you. But I'm also, I think I was a little naive until I left EE Times, because when I was at EE Times, we never did that. But I heard subsequently, other publications often do what they call pay, and I never dream of doing that now. And but that has become more and more prevalent, and that's worrisome to me because you're giving more. I think providing forum to companies is a good thing, but being independent in writing stories is it should be more valued, cherished, and encouraged. And I think that's where we stand. And as I said, it's not easy, but at the same time, it is a lot of fun. It is a lot of fun in a way that there's no constraint, no shackles around us, right?
And
And
absolutely, and that comes across loud and clear. And in your reporting, it's clear that you're having a lot of fun with pulling apart
thank you.
the pretensions of the
May I
automotive industry on
just,
autonomous vehicles and things.
Yeah.
Tim, may I add one thing? There's a role for public relation companies, PR firms, marketing firms. There's a role that they can play. They can help their customers better understand, what's going on in the market and the kind of stories that they should be telling. They can create avenues for us to talk with the right people at all of these companies, but you have to first try by educating the companies, the management of these companies about, the values of objective reporting. It does pay off longer term,
Yes,
and
Yeah.
that
absolutely.
I think that's a big role for PR firms to play.
Mm. Yeah, thank you. That's fantastic advice. Yeah, and you must, I guess, feel very confident that because you have a subscriber base, so your audience is paying, they value what you write so much that they will pay for it. That is a really committed and engaged audience. Um, are you able to, in any way, quantify that sense of engagement that your audience has with what you write?
So let me describe the audience for you. These are folks who make the critical decisions about which direction the business is headed. How do they engage with customers? How do they engage with suppliers? How do they engage with regulators? How do they engage with government? How do they source funding for what they do? The analyst community, the investment community, shareholders, all of these folks, they just don't want you just sending them the news because the companies have the way of getting the news out.
Mm,
They can
mm,
use Business Wire, they can use all kinds of news
mm,
agencies, right?
mm,
They can post it on their own website. They have their own database that they can send it to. But what does it mean?
mm,
How will what they're sending out, how will it impact their ecosystem? Okay. Who's talking about what's likely to happen in future? Again, I'm sorry, Junko, I may put you on the spot, but when people start writing about the automotive semiconductor market now, I still recall we had a conversation where Junko said, you know what, this is going to be a hot area. And she decided, it's about 10 years ago, if I'm right, Junko, or more, that she decided she was going to focus on it well before automotive semiconductor became what it has become now. But she was not just following the news. She was also saying that, look, here is what's going to happen. Here's how it's going to happen. Here are the actions that's taking place behind the scene. Here's what it means and who is taking responsibility for some of the products that were being developed and how they're being used in the marketplace. So we take a look at China also. What's going to happen with China? What's going to happen with all of these industries? Up until very recently, Junko was always going to China and Japan. Even though there has been a cutback in the number of editors and reporters covering those areas. Why did I bring that up? It's because there are folks in the industry, and I can cite them again, who need the kind of information and analysis that certain press organizations can provide. I still recall writing one article about the electronic supply chain, and I got a call from the CEO of one big company, and he said, "Thank you." And I was wondering, how about what? And he said, "I don't want to know the news. I have 1,001 sources for getting the news. The reason I subscribe to your publication is because I want to know what you think, what's going to happen next."
mm.
So there is an audience that's willing to pay, but it takes them time to take a decision.
Well, look, just one final question, is just to ask you about kind of your confidence in the industry. I hear a lot of people talking about the industry being on this certain roadmap towards $1 trillion in annual sales by the 2030 or the early 2030s. This a period of incredible expansion in the industry. Um, is it a business that you, in the same way, feel sort of very confident about, and that is set on a path to growth for as long as we can see forward?
Well, let me start because I'm the junior person here when it comes to business. But here's what I think. Yes, I feel very confident, but what I'm not feel confident about is the disparity we're beginning to see. We only have a few players that are really making a lot of money, and there are companies, the smaller companies with great ideas, but they can't get ahead, or they can't get the capacity, or they can't get the attention, right? So that disparity is disconcerting for the health of semiconductor industry, I think.
I don't think you could sum it up better than that, honestly. Innovation is happening and it's spreading throughout the economy. Forget, I'm not even sure there is a semiconductor industry anymore. It's all over. It's like oxygen
Mm,
for
mm,
every segment of the economy.
mm,
And it impacts defense, security, aerospace, aviation. I mean, it doesn't matter which area of the economy you're looking at, which means that $1 trillion goal is easily reachable, especially now with artificial intelligence, right?
mm,
So you can get to it. I
mm.
think that, interestingly, Junko and I have not even had the time to discuss this, but I'm glad she mentioned that. You have a problem of capacity. And it's not capacity just in terms of, do we have enough manufacturing space? It's capacity in terms of being able to absorb the new companies that are coming up with great ideas and making sure they don't die in infancy. They need access to fabs that are billions of dollars to build. And those companies that are building them, they can't just say you can load anything into it. They need volume, right? So that's that problem that smaller companies are going to have. And so now you do have a situation where there are very, very big companies that are making a huge part of the money. That's one. On the capital market, in the equity market, well, NVIDIA is a $1 trillion company. That tells you that there is a future, and it's huge for this business. But then once after NVIDIA, then you have TSMC. Look at the valuation of all of the other companies. They drop very, very low, right? They're still bigger, and all of these companies have cash. But there's a disparity that's happening. That's one. Secondly, on the supply chain front, now you have this split between East and West. China is a huge market. So, and yet the West is saying, look, we don't want to release certain technologies to the Chinese. That problem is another one that the industry has to figure out a way to handle. So all of these hurdles are going to impact the business. One thing that we are glad about is this, which is that there is so much to cover now. There's so much to write about. Oh, God knows there's so much. I mean, sometimes I ask myself, I wish I was in my 20s again, because then I can look ahead, hopefully, at another 40, 50 years of writing about this industry. It's fascinating times, it's challenging times, which makes it interesting times.
Absolutely. Well, I can't think of two people that are better to be covering all these fascinating issues that you've been talking about. It's wonderful that you're doing what you're doing, and I would recommend the Ojo-Yoshida Report to anyone who listens to this podcast. Thank you so much to both of you for taking the time to talk to me and telling us your story and about sort of your views on the industry and the media landscape that we're operating in. It's been fascinating, really good to talk to you, and thank you so much.
Thank you
Well,
for having
thank
us,
you.
Tim.
Thank you for having us. It was great. It was good to talk to you.